You got to meet the market where it is. It's not what you think the customer wants. It's what the customer actually wants.
A robot, which could crank out a 4-point saddle in 42 seconds versus an hour. What I was hearing was 40% waste on conduit.
You lose efficiency in hard bid. You gain cost, but you lose efficiency. We try to bid out negotiated packages early enough where we have something for them to respond to, and we pick a partner, and we try to work really hard with that partner.
I don't want to get more into the political side, but I think it's fascinating because they were citing, it's estimated 14% of the labor force in construction is undocumented.
Wow, really?
So 14% of the labor force could be, remains to be seen what all will transpire, could be deported, which I was kind of sitting here going like, wonder what Fu thinks of that. Because that's an interesting one.
It really is. It really is. Because it's interesting being kind of, I work all over, but
yeah.
I've been in Alabama now for over 20 years on and off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Alabama went through this, probably about 2008 era.
Yeah.
They enacted a lot of these laws that, we might see nationally or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it really changed the nature of the workforce. And, it's interesting because the first big kind of industrialized construction company I worked for was in Alabama, and are those two ideas linked, mm-hmm. because we saw a lot of attrition in the workforce. And, these guys that left, they weren't just field hands. I mean, these guys some of them were in charge, some of them were pretty skilled, some of them were the workforce, carpenters, electricians, plumbers. And that, I know it hit I'm not an expert on this. Of course, we have a lot of colleagues that are builders, mm-hmm. but it hit them pretty hard.
Yeah.
And of course, you have to adjust.
Yeah. And
I think for those reasons and for many other reasons, Industrialized is here to stay. I mean, it isn't just that aspect. It's the retirements. I mean, y'all are familiar with that in your family too. You have the guys that knew everything or retired and hopefully playing golf, whatever they're doing. So we're going to see a different structure of the workforce than we've been used to.
Yeah.
In these next years for lots of reasons.
Like, how are we going to make up the gap other than like systemization of everything?
Right.
Like, I mean, putting things more into factories, using robotics, like, because we just don't have the people.
Absolutely.
Like, you're not going to be able to onboard and get these people skilled quick enough to keep up with the demand. I mean, if we're looking around at just data centers, like, holy smokes.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Those things are occupying so much of the attention lately.
Right.
I feel I go, like last week, I think I heard data center like 5 times in different conversations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy.
And, and then I think you've got that. You've also got this kind of weird, this dichotomy between mega project work and local work. Mm-hmm. And these mega projects, you can go get paid top tier money.
Yeah.
And you know where you're going. You know where you're going to be for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Well, that's pulling all the talented guys that are normally in your town, USA, that are doing the residential, and they're saying, well, hey, I'm going to go work on this for 2 years. So it like sucks the labor out of, it's a kind of an attractor. Mm-hmm. And so it's creating these like pockets of lack of labor everywhere.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dynamics, I think, that are going to hurt it. And I think we're going to turn into a higher cost country We're going to have
Yeah.
the cost of labor is going to be higher, which means automation is going to be much more affordable.
Yeah.
Right. Systems are going to be much more affordable because obviously what are your options? And we still have a lot of demand. But to your point, I was in Japan, 3-4 weeks ago, and they have the same issue.
Really?
Yeah. And they're talking about this stuff in the same way. They actually want to learn about what we're doing about it.
We're clueless.
Well,
we're clueless. I feel like we have some ideas, but not like anything that's working really well. It's a long-term thing that needs to be solved, right?
Yeah, and this is where, I really like local approaches to problems, right? Like getting the localized to be as good as it can be. But what's also interesting is we're having this problem actually globally. So the Japanese are dealing with it. They're also looking at markets that are rapidly urbanizing in places like Vietnam, Malaysia, these kind of South Asian economies that are now building middle classes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to figure out, well, how do we do this? You go to the Nordics, they've been dealing with it for quite some time because they kind of aged earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think for them, it's an aging piece. For us, it's a demand plus workforce training.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do enough of that workforce training, say in the trades, because we had so much available unskilled labor.
Right.
So we didn't need to do it.
Yeah.
And that has inverted. I think if you look at some of the data that I've seen that I use, about 2008 is where you start seeing that really become really pronounced. Because we had those 2008, 2012, we had very anemic recovery in construction, as you probably remember. Yeah. And a lot of people just left the workforce, found other things, took early retirement, opened up their coffee shops or restaurants or whatever dream they had. They didn't want to go back in. And so you start seeing how growth in construction is outstripping growth in supply of labor in construction, skilled, unskilled. My son actually is a very good student. He's 17 years old. He's got a very good GPA, but they just launched a program at his high school where he can do vocational in the afternoon and college track in the morning. And so he's been apprenticing in electrical now for, I think, over a year.
Wow.
And he'll graduate with a journeyman, I believe, his journeyman ready to go. And he's excited about going in electrical. He's not ready to go to college. He'd like to work in the trades for a while.
Yeah.
And I encourage him to do it. I think that's a wonderful thing for a young man to do. I know I probably wasn't quite ready to go into college at his age either. Mm-hmm. I could have used a few years maybe like that. But we'll need to be doing that for 10 years to build a master electrician core. And what are we doing in that 10 years until that cohort kind of grows up? And even then, they're not. We don't have that as many to replace the boomers. I mean, the boomers was, the biggest generation we ever had. So it's going to be an ongoing challenge. Plus, these kids are going to want to do software. They're going to want to do finance just like they've been. So it's not like everybody's going to just flood. But I think encouraging young people to find a future in the trades, that's really exciting. You can see that we're starting to think about this as a problem. I know Mike Rowe's been talking about this for years, right?
Yeah.
To his credit,
That's the thing is like it's the talking versus the doing, right? And like, so I see a lot of talk about it, but I want to try to highlight the people that are actually out there trying to solve it. Like that's the reason I always kind of give Angie Simon props whenever I bring this issue up. She's actually trying to solve it and get people interested in it. But like I feel like it got even more intense based off of that metric if we've got 14% of like this isn't, I wouldn't say that every person in there is a skilled worker, right? But it's still hands, right? It's still people that are building stuff. And it does lean way more residential in nature. So like the data center side of things that we were talking about, Maybe not as much there. I think it's a little more stringent, but even then, like you think about the impact throughout the entire built world environment, like that's huge. Farming was the other one that they mentioned too.
Yeah.
41% is what the estimate is.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's already a challenge in and of itself. So I don't know. The ripple from this is really interesting to kind of just sit back and evaluate. And the question on my mind is like, what can I do to build up something that can actually bring people online faster? You know what I mean? Like, but even then, it's like, even if I could build something like that,
you've got to meet it halfway. Gosh.
It's still like, I mean, they need time in the seat. Right. It's like, so if I build out this training curriculum for so-and-so, like they need 5 years in order to like become that journeyman or whatever it is. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's complex. I kind of wanted to start there just because I thought it was an interesting stat. I wanted to see what your take was on it.
Yeah. I've been doing some research and there's some work right now in Finland about, setting up kind of production facilities in what they're calling high cost countries.
Okay.
And how you might do that effectively and how that might differ even from something like automotive manufacturing, for example, right? Because we can only stretch that analogy so far. Automotive is different than construction. We can get into some detail as to why. So we can learn a lot from that. But what you're really talking about here is we're going to be building things in smaller batches, right? They're going to be a lot more specific to the particular job or the particular type of building or the particular customer. And understanding how to do that profitably is a thing. There is a form of business model that works for that. And I think if you go to places that are, pretty successful at punching above their weight, like for example, the Nordic countries, they've had to deal with this for longer and they have kind of models around this. So you go, I always thought that I was in Sweden for about 5 years. I was always impressed with how, for example, how good their gear was. I mean, obviously you have the weather, but if you think about it, hey, that individual, that skilled worker, they're a lot more valuable, right? Because there's fewer of them. You want to give that person, getting them equipped, getting them correct protective gear, getting them stuff that's really robust, it's more of a thing.
Yeah.
Because they're so valuable in of themselves. So you kind of notice these differences like, wow, everybody here has like really good gear all the time.
Yeah.
And they're much more into automation. You see a lot more interesting craning and conveyance on site. They're able to work in blizzard conditions safely, which is just like, how do they even do that?
Yeah.
You see things like tenting so that they can continue to work in all weather. So scaffolding and tenting is really well developed there. Obviously we're not going to deal with those extreme colds, but what are we going to do about the extreme heat?
Yeah.
You've got this workforce that's more valuable to you and conditions outside are getting worse and they're unsafe. So that tells you, okay, can we get it under roof, right?
Yeah.
You can start to see how all these trends are converging in a certain direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. Tyler Williams brought up one of those companies. It was more of like a pop-up shelter sort of thing. I can't forget the name of it, but that was interesting to me of like, crap, dude. We went out to do a shoot. It was in mid-July and it was kind of crazy. Like we were out in the sun and dude, it was brutal.
Yeah.
It was brutal. And I was like, there are people out here all day, every flipping day, getting it done. Like my hat is off to you, sir.
Yeah.
But looking to the Nordic countries, that's an interesting take because like I would have never thought that would be the case. But I mean, it makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, they aged faster. And then the interesting thing about the Nordics, they actually had a financial crisis just like ours, but in the 90s.
Okay.
And it did the same kind of thing to their workforce that it did to ours. It forced a lot of retirements. A lot of people ended up going into different fields and didn't come back.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting. Like for me, I was an architect. When I went over there, there weren't a lot of guys in that. I was 37. we didn't have a lot of guys in that 50 to 60 or, I'd say about 50 to 65 range. Like you go in these offices, I'm 37. I'm one of the most seasoned guys that are there. Where are the guys? Well, yeah, back in the 90s, everybody kind of got out and didn't come back. And we saw that here in 2008. So these big financial events, they can restructure the market. Another story from the Nordics that I really like to think about. In the 1970s, they had a very important prime minister there named Olof Palme. And at the time, they didn't have enough good housing in Sweden. And Olof Palme was a very powerful politician. He kind of was one of those generational leaders. Like he was there forever, like him or hate him. And he said that he made a similar pledge. I think you recently heard in the elections, he said, we're going to do 1 million units of housing, modern housing in 10 years, which was a huge lift for that sector. And as a result of the demand that placed on the market, you began to see things like liability got restructured. So architects traditionally had similar liability as they have here. They were in charge of everything. Well, the architects couldn't keep up. So engineering firms and contractors said, we'll take over. And so the liability requirements when you go to Sweden are not stringent for architects. In fact, they don't require licensure like we do here.
Wow.
Yes, it's carried exclusively by the engineer and the contractor because they were making these system-built precast concrete housing, a lot of those kinds of things. And they say, hey, we'll do it. We'll take on the liability. And the other thing that it did is it made two-part contracting much more common. So it's kind of like design-build contracting where the architect kind of takes it to about conceptual, and then from pricing forward or, conceptual pricing, the contractor assumes control. And if the architect continues on the project, he'll work for the contractor. And I worked in that format quite a bit. We don't see that a lot in the United States because we have the owner, architect, contractor. We have the kind of the triangle. But we might start to see things like that happen because of the response to the demand in ways that some of these other countries have already dealt with. And so I think it's interesting to go look at those as case studies and think about, hey, do we want to do that? Do we want to do something else? You can always learn from these other economies. But it's going to be a factor for sure. It's already happening.
Define, we're talking industrialized construction. Give me a quick definition on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's always a good question. So industrialized construction is a set of practices that come out of manufacturing, but then are applied to construction and include things like modular construction, prefabrication, and what we consider offsite. And those may have slight differences. Also, a lot of what we think about now, it's pretty popular, is lean construction. That comes from industrialized. So I'm including that in that basket as an umbrella term. So all of these things where we're trying to systematize things, maybe we're putting them under roof. We're also looking at processes and how to optimize processes in a more rigorous way, kind of control our processes more. All that I would characterize as industrialized construction. And so we get caught up a lot today. There's a lot of conversation about, do we want mods? Do we want panels? Do we want kitted parts? What are we talking about? And I'm saying it's all of it, all of the above. I wouldn't throw any of it out. The trick is figuring out what's most appropriate for each case. What of that industrialized umbrella are you going to pick out for your project that works for your situation? And I don't believe that industrialized is just for big players or big projects. I'm working with some really innovative, smaller developers, for example, that are looking at this and thinking about it in their way. I do think it scales appropriately, but I think you gotta understand the kind of the differences and the nuances between how you'd apply it at a smaller scale and how you might apply it at a large enterprise.
You sent a white paper over to us, kind of a base premise on that. What was your base premise on the white paper?
Well, the white papers, I think since we last saw each other, we ended up entering the National Mass Timber Competition, working with a client in Arkansas on affordable housing systems. I'm not saying affordable in the big A, I'm just saying more affordable, including affordable and market rate. But basically the idea is, how do we get these costs under control? Because in Northwest Arkansas, they have a rapidly urbanizing community. You've got some big employers there, and they're trying to draw people into that area, and they're trying to figure out how to solve the housing puzzle, not because they want to do housing development, because they want to staff their growing companies. It's a very dynamic region. It's the 15th fastest growing metro region in the country. And so we entered a competition using an industrialized kit of parts. The mass timber competition, we're using cross-laminated timber panels, and won. And as a result of that, one of our we received a sizable grant from the USDA Forest Service and the Softwood Lumber Board, which is an industry trade group, to promote the use of this mass timber. And these are, I don't know if you're familiar with mass timber, but mass timber are these great big wood panels. You can basically use them like Lego blocks. And you can use them in combination with things, because wood's just such a great material. You can nail into it just like regular wood, or you can use it all as a total kit of parts. So how do we start promoting the adoption of this? And we're very focused on that affordable and market rate segment. And so we've been writing white papers, kind of industry education, market education, outreach, just for free. They're available online for free, just to kind of orient people on both the application in mass timber, but the general theory around industrialized and why it might make sense.
Play that out. Why does industrialized construction make the most sense to solve that puzzle piece?
Well, I think the easiest thing to think about when you think about industrialized is, I'm an owner-operator of a portfolio of buildings, or I'm thinking about building a lot of things similarly over a period of time. I have a problem I need to solve, which is I'm seeing cost escalation on my jobs. Jobs are coming in late, and I don't want to be late. Jobs are coming in where the quality is not consistent, and I need it to be consistent. And so how do I address this problem if I'm somebody in charge of that build out? Or if you're a leader thinking about investing in such an effort, what's the best way to think about it? What's the latest thinking about it? And so for that class, for the owner-operator class of users, industrialized is probably the easiest thing to think about. But it also works for commercial developers when we get them back. If they're thinking a little bit, looking out and say, hey, is there a better way to do this? What parts of this can we standardize and still meet the market where we need to be? Then you might be able to lasso the things that'll give you the most bang for your buck and industrialize them. And there's now over the last, I'd say 10 years, you've got a fair amount of fabricators around the country that can handle this kind of work. You have people that are used to working along these lines, and it's growing. And you talk to some of the bigger contractors, they're focused on this and they want to see it grow for them because it makes sense for them as well. They're dealing with all the resource constraints and the cost escalation that everybody else is, So I think it's working for owners. I think it's working for builders. And I think you're seeing more and more solution providers, designers, trades that are also thinking about this and getting engaged with it right now.
You went to Japan. That's the cradle of lean construction. And I think it's interesting that you had mentioned they were asking, like, what are we doing here, right? That's kind of a turn of, the tables have turned a little bit there in some sense. But then you also mentioned the quality that was noticeable in everything that was in the built environment over there. So
Yeah. Yeah. They're almost like industrialized from scratch, you know. And they've got, I think, the oldest construction company, just to kind of talk about their building heritage. I mean, that's one of the most gratifying things, by the way, of in my career. You know, I've worked in the UK, I've worked in the Nordics, and just, you know, being able to travel to Japan or whatever. Building is a brotherhood, sisterhood, all across the world. You meet a fellow builder and you may not know the language that they're speaking, but chances are they like being outdoors. They're really interested in how things are put together. You can relate almost immediately, whether they're at a big corporate construction company in Japan. You know, we went there. We were very lucky. Built Worlds put on a really good program. And we went to two of the biggest, shout out to Built Worlds, two of the biggest Japanese contractors in the country. One is called Kajima, and the other one is called Shimizu. And we went to, Shimizu has an innovation center, and they have a 200-year-old, they have a glass case. This is very moving, I think, if you're into this. They have a glass case, and it was the founder of the company's crowbar, his chalk line, and his squares. He had two squares, and they're almost like, they look like illuminated manuscripts. You know, they're painted by hand. They're 200 years old. They're in this glass case. They're like holy relics. Uh-huh. And these were ceremonial tools that they use. And then he had his work jacket in another case. And over there, only masters of a certain rank were allowed to wear these long, I think they're called short coats, or these working jackets. And they have it on display like it's a museum. I mean, it is a museum item. And that's just how much pride they take in being a builder, you know? And I think anybody here can relate to that. Yeah. You know, any builder from anywhere can look at that and say, "Oh, totally get that," right? So I think that was really nice to kind of feel the commonality of it. And they're very interested in things we're doing over here to promote Industrialized. We learned a lot from them when automotive came from Japan in the 1980s. They had to start building these plants. Actually, did you know the story about that? Mm-hmm. Why did all of a sudden we start learning about lean manufacturing in the United States? I heard the story the other day, and I actually haven't looked it up, but I believe it to be true. But basically, it was a tariff situation.
Really?
Yes.
So you say lean, and I immediately think like Toyota.
Toyota,
right? Like
lean really is yes, Toyota production system.
But tariffs.
Yeah. So apparently, I didn't know this, but remember, there was everybody knows the story, right? We had the gas guzzler cars in the 1970s, and nobody was very happy with them. Yeah. The quality wasn't good. They would break down or whatever it was. And that got better. But the Japanese were making these little cars that everybody made fun of. But they were really cheap and fun, and they didn't break down that much, right? And eventually what you saw is those two things like had babies. And that's what, you know, modern cars today, American cars are fantastic. I mean, you get in an American car, the quality is amazing. I mean, do you remember, I remember when I was in high school, you might get a certain kind of sports car, and it really didn't last that long, you know, but now you get in an American car, you get in a Japanese car, a German car, and the quality's phenomenal. The cars drive themselves. So how did that happen? Well, apparently, we had slapped those cars with tariffs, and it was crimping their access to the American market. And as a result, they came and built the plants here. But in order to build the plants here, they had to bring their production systems to the United States and train everybody on how to do this. And lean was about a reaction to mass production. We would build so many car doors if 30% of them were defective, and I'm not saying that was the defect rate, but let's just say it was. Well, they would build them so cheap, you could just throw that one out, pick up another one, and put it on there. And the Japanese realized they could never compete on that basis with American manufacturing. We had the resources, we had the capacity. So instead, they started attacking those defect and rework rates so that they didn't have to throw stuff away because they really were resource poor. And that's the mindset that shifted. We went from a mass production to a lean production. We went from being able to do as much as we wanted because we could throw 40% away as scrap to basically zeroing in on the waste and making sure that we were building stuff without defects. And it was very successful.
Residential construction, I've heard it's what, one house is thrown away for like every 4 we build. So like residential construction is insanely wasteful. I'm going to go you that as that gets more into the realms of like multifamily, I don't know how much better it would really get. It's probably based on kind of the mentality and the what the crews are accustomed to doing, like how they're accustomed to doing something. Like I got a pile of wood, I bring it out, I hack it up into whatever I need to do. Or was there like pre-planning and I'm bringing things out and using them well. So that all plays in. It would seem very well to if we pinpoint that for the industrializing of construction of like a multifamily housing. Maybe that's the way. Is that the affordability play?
Well, that's like part of it. I mean, that's not one. That's just not.
It's got to be that efficiency, right?
Yeah, it's the efficiency. So I'm just curious from your side, Eddie. I mean, what do you see in terms of material shrink on steel orders? What's typical?
What do you mean by steel? Like shrink, material shrink?
Yeah, I mean, material shrink is what it's like, okay, well, the quantities. Well, for steel, I guess you guys are very efficient because you cut everything. But let's just say you're going to go buy tube steel from the mill and you're going to put this package together. How much of that do you plan on throwing away when you calculate your quantities?
Yeah, I mean, some of these companies have gotten fairly sophisticated with that, especially with the advent of EST modeling, right? So if I can come in and I can model all of the steel and then I can hand that over to a supplier and that supplier can actually know, I need a 35-footer. Then we can nest that material. So all the steel material is nested by default.
Yeah, so you guys are actually on this
right,
already.
So we know exactly what our job is now.
Steel,
a good design plays that.
I was going to say that. I was going to say that. Is that we saw more waste because the design was not right. Well, it's like, and we've done that before. I remember we were working on some other systems where it was like, well, what if we just took stock lengths and we did this and this and this and this and this?
Yeah.
And
there's a marriage.
Right.
There's good design that plays that in, but then there's also like the mills know this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. The supply houses know this stuff. So, I mean, milled steel profiles have some basis of like what's needed to be constructed well. I mean, and MC12 by 14.3 is specifically milled so that you can have a stair channel made out of it and that it's wide enough to receive the pipe that comes down on top of it. So there's a lot of forethought in that. But we can still see when things get thrown to the wind, if you're not really thinking through any of that, waste is going to go up.
Right.
Your drops are going to go up because if I put a project on a tight schedule, meaning I can't go to the mill to actually order down, within maybe 3 inches of what I need, I'm going to have to go to a supply house and just pick off whatever I can.
Right.
And now I'm at the mercies of whatever material availability I have. And that could go well or that could go not well. If I need a bunch of 25s and all I can do is buy 45-foot sticks, well, then that's like a really bad recipe.
Yeah.
Right? So... Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the work we're doing right now is like trying to work with specific suppliers and saying, okay, for example, on a billet of cross-laminated timber, what is your most efficient size? I want it coming right off the press. Don't do anything to it. Just tell me what is my maximum yield? Now, can I take that, go back to my multifamily architect and say, I need you to actually sometimes making the unit bigger is more efficient than making it smaller. And that's one of the problems is we work with a lot of developers that are thinking cost per square foot, so I want it smaller, right? But you might be making it smaller and wasting 10, 15% of the material when you could have that material in your build out, have a larger unit, command a better rent. And so a lot of it is optimizing around like these sizes early. And sometimes it means negotiating with your likely suppliers early enough where you can build it around what your supplier's capabilities are. That's something we're not used to doing because we want to have so much competitively bid. But I think as we move forward, the point we're trying to make here is that these supply chain partnerships are really valuable if you think about it in terms of industrialized construction. You need to build safeguards to make sure you get your money's worth. Sure, we accept that. But on the other hand, working with that supplier on a kind of a partnership basis, that's going to give you real results, especially when you get a piece that's much more machined, like say a piece of cross-laminated timber, right? In a lot of ways, it comes in the way you're talking about with the steel. You can get really efficient with that size and instead of just rushing through it and throwing a lot of that material away. So it's training those designers to start looking at that early enough and also educating the owners that this is valuable activity for them, even though it's early money.
Yeah.
You know?
So this was something I saw play out the other day where I think it was like both sides of it had gone wrong. Right. So electrical conduit. Right. I went up there and I visited a shop with Brian. Shout out to Brian Nickel. And they were putting a new bending machine in an electrical shop, right? Prefab. And it was amazing to watch the guys who were manually doing it. They were taking a 4-inch conduit, they were putting it in a bender, hydraulic bender, and they would like the whole thing would bend and do the thing, and it was pretty cool to watch. And then they get the thing off the bender, and then they go over there and they take their chop saw and they cut the end off of it, and then they measure it and they do this, and they go over there and they bend another one. And so, like to do a 4-point saddle took them about an hour for a 4-inch conduit. Contrast that with a robot, which could crank out a 4-point saddle in 42 seconds versus an hour. So there's an efficiency thing there. But you could hear and see some of the different waste. Like, so what I was hearing was 40% waste.
Wow.
On conduit. Because you think about it, if you're supplying this to like a data center, miles and miles and miles and miles of conduit. So like a foot here, 2 feet there, that adds up. And so I remember going over and looking at the bin and just seeing how like they just had piles of conduit, just scrap sitting there.
Right.
And so as much of like about 40% down to like, he said 20% is a nice way of putting it. Sometimes they didn't get as much kickback or as much pushback from people when he says 20%, but 40% is really what they've calculated. But the thing is like the designers aren't specifying solid lengths, but then you go down to the shop level and they're not taking those lengths into consideration and they're just chopping it and they're getting the job done, right?
Right.
But when you model it out and you're using a 3D practice, you can, if you so choose, and you go to that level, figure out better stock lengths that you can use and you can bend it to where you're not wasting as much material. But then you kind of run into a labor shortage of BIM operators who also understand how stuff goes together. And there's another entanglement
another
that we'll run
bottleneck
into
there. Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So that was an example. I felt like the designers weren't optimizing. They were just saying, yeah, I'll just put a conduit here. And then the people in the shop were also like, and just getting the job done. And so it's just an interesting little dynamic in that scenario. Steel is,
Yeah, electrical is really interesting there. I think a lot of those electrical shops are taking the lead on some of this stuff and are able to do these multi-trade assemblies. And so once you put that conduit now in a rack underground rack, overhead rack, whatever it is, and you start thinking about those optimal rack lengths, you can start actually attacking that problem much easier because now you've got an assembly and you're going to repeat that assembly as many times as you can.
Yeah.
And then could you feedback on the length of that assembly back, because now you've kind of concentrated the importance of that piece in the owner's mind and the builder's mind, and you can start to attack these things better. There's a group in Wisconsin, just outside of Minneapolis, called Bear Electric. Shout out to Bear, good friends of ours. And they've got a prefab facility there where they're building these things as assemblies. A lot of it is being driven by data center, but I think we'll see that start to port over.
So check it. Okay, I'm on the Grainger website right now looking it up. 4-inch conduit, $200 for a 10-foot stick. You waste 2 feet of that. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Right.
Sorry, I just wanted to chuck that out there. The material is expensive.
How do we even
Holy
think
cow.
about it? Because there's a certain point you start thinking about it, it's like overwhelming.
Right.
It's like, and I think without these assemblies, it gets really hard to deal with.
Yeah.
But so kind of binding all that together in an assembly, it really starts helping. And then that could turn into a product, right? Which everybody wants to productize things.
Yeah.
So you start to see how we can start rationally addressing some of this.
Yeah.
We're going to have a whole process in this industry of marrying trades, right? Like if I want to have a tray of a certain length, does the tray work with the conduit lengths? Like I'm working for a material efficiency that has 2 different things that aren't compatible, but they have to go together. It's like buying hot dogs and hot dog buns. Like, just wish you could buy the same amount of each, but it just never happens.
Yeah. It just comes packaged together. The hot dog and the bun and the amount of ketchup that you need. Yeah. Exactly right. Yes.
We're going to have to step back and go, oh, those things work together. We're going to actually have to pay attention.
Did you just father of the bride?
Totally
this
right.
thing?
I did. Now,
wow. All right.
I'm going to go some big shot. Yeah. That's some big shot. If you know, you know.
Some big shot.
All right. So I want to go back to unit costs because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, right? I could relate to maybe a heavier piece of steel could render a much easier connection, right? Or a much easier job installing.
Right.
But the almighty unit cost when it comes to hard bid, you've got to have somebody on the other end that's going to acknowledge and actually hand that back.
Yeah.
And that's tough because, as an industry, we're taught to price a certain way. I price by the ton of steel. I price by the, square foot of floor space.
Right.
And so you're going to have to try to bring the control of that cost back as well. To where you've got some say, like where that's acknowledged. We did this work and design to make sure this efficiency is there, but you're going to have to acknowledge that efficiency.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
I think hard bid is a real challenge when we're thinking about these kind of integrated packages, because it makes coordination, that level of coordination, more difficult. And I think we're just going to have to get creative about how we do hard bid packages and maybe break them out in different ways. I don't really know, but that's definitely a frontier, addressing hard bid. I was reading a little bit, about kind of what's going on. Again, not to get political, but I was reading an editorial this morning about military contracting and how it's been cost plus for years and years and years. And it's great for the contractors because they can just cost plus everything, but the budgets just run away and they want to go back to kind of a hard bid scenario. And I can understand that, but I do think when you're coordinating multi-trade and you need to build around a specific capability on a product and you don't always get apples to apples when you hard bid it, how do we think about that in a way that is best advantages the owner? You lose efficiency in hard bid. You gain cost, but you lose efficiency. Things kind of have to be figured out at a time when the design budget's already been spent and everybody suffers. People get frustrated and it gets done. But I think we just need a new mindset around that. Maybe there's ways to creatively address hard bid. We work a lot with negotiated. We try to bid out negotiated packages early enough where we have something for them to respond to. And we pick a partner and we try to work really hard with that partner. And then we do it again and we try to give others a chance, or we'll look at different formats that work with some other partners. But I don't know the answer to that one. We're going to need to figure it out.
Early money. You said that phrase is stuck in my head, the early money.
Yeah.
That is a thing that stands in the way of investment in planning.
Yes.
And why does an owner developer not want to invest early money?
They don't have it. Real easy.
Go figure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why don't they have it?
Well, because in order to
they're not playing with their money.
They're not playing with their money.
They're not playing with their money, so they're paying for that money the minute they close on it, right? So the earlier they go, the more they pay. They don't want to do that. And I have some friends in banking that are starting to look at this, and I hope they come out with some finance mechanisms that can help us get there. In Industrialized, you need that early money because the engineering deposits are due and you're trying to reserve your spot in line. For a plant operator, you want to have job after job after job after job. And so you're trying to get that line scheduled and efficient as early as you can so you can get your people working, get the efficiencies in. Whereas the developer is trying to wait as long as possible before they spend $1. So those two things don't really line up very well. Mm-hmm. And de-risking the relationship from both sides, the plant owner side and the developer side, is really important. So that's where I think, the way I would pitch this is if you are buying materials and it's in a controlled environment and those materials are labeled and they're set aside for this particular job, and you have an adverse event, you can just take those materials and resell them. You can repossess those materials and sell them, right? If you're creating industrialized products that are clearly labeled, that are standardized, and there's an adverse event after the production's complete, you can repurpose those on other jobs. Every item is tagged, every item is QR coded, it's tracked, it's serialized, there's a chain of custody. You know if there's any defects in it. Why wouldn't banks and bonding people, insurance companies, give you preferential rates? Isn't that less risk for them? So I think as people start seeing the advantages of that, maybe we'll start kind of restructuring the finance part of it to support this, because I think long term, it's a much better deal for the lenders.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Thought experiment time, right? All right.
Here we go.
How much does a bathroom module cost to buy? Not to build, but like the finalized product. Like we're probably just going to do with some hand waves here, but let's just throw a number out.
Let's just say on a residential project, it might cost, for a residential mod, maybe 12 to 15. 12 to 17K, let's just say.
All right, so the automotive industry.
Probably 14 to 17K with inflation these days, whatever.
Automotive, we can't plug and play for everything, like you said. Things are small batch and they need adaptivity and all this. But the automotive industry, they don't take money in the same way. Like they don't think through financing like you were just talking about. They produce cars and then they find mechanisms to sell cars. Will we see, and that's a $50,000 car, that's a $100,000 car. Why aren't we pre-producing a volume of modular bathrooms that are sitting on the shelf that an architect knows about because it's a product? and the designers design them in. And then the financiers we're not having to worry with the financiers. We can go pick them off of the shelf.
I think you'll start to get close to that. Yeah. And we've started developing some kind of almost open sourcing some of our mod designs so that other developers can buy, because like whatever designs we have, the more people buy them, the lower the unit costs will be. The easier it'll be to, control the cost. So we want like as large a production run as you possibly can get. However, markets, I think the real estate market and the construction market, you're used to like, you've got different soils, right? You've got different climates, right? You have different tastes. You're doing a project in Toronto, and that's a very sophisticated, or Vancouver, it's like one of the premier real estate markets in the world. New York City, Chicago, San Francisco. Well, the expectation in that market is going to be different than Des Moines, right? You're doing it for high-rise condo versus a low-rise, affordable, sustainable developer in the Midwest. And I don't want to lose that. I think you got to meet the market where it is. It's not what you think the customer wants. It's what the customer actually wants, right? So I think you try and develop kind of these chassis designs that are common, and you use a lot of common parts, but you need the flexibility to kind of meet the consumer's expectation. I don't think we need to get away from that. Now, if less variety means a lower cost, then we'll find what economists call an equilibrium where that's going to work. I mean, that's going to happen. That's what markets do. That's the nice thing about markets is you'll find the most efficient thing that gives you just enough variety and just enough novelty that it'll sell. And that's really that's the game we're playing right now. That's the fun part. But markets are differentiated. Regional markets are differentiated. I travel all over the country. I love seeing the differences in the Mountain West versus the Southeast versus the Mid-Atlantic versus the West Coast. I think that's the diversity of this. Our construction market in the United States is a strength. It's great. It's beautiful. And I don't think we should lose that. I think we should just get smarter about meeting it, and I think we can.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's a good thought.
It makes me think of, all right, so when we're talking about like customization and going back to the automotive thing, Rolls-Royce does that really well.
Mm-hmm. They do.
And they have like shelves of like all the different materials and all the different things. And then you got your muckety mucks going in there saying, I want this and this and this and this and Corinthian leather and all that fun stuff. If you know, Corinthian leather. Anyway, that's the play with them. And I almost wonder if there's a spot where it's like you build the pod just enough, or you build the thing just enough. And then you have these little hot swaps that you can easily do to differentiate it, right? So it's like you could have the bones of it in the yard, which is like 90% of the problem. And then the next 10% is literally just the aesthetics to make it match what that client might want, or whatever the architect deems is like, hey, this is the design we would like to see, or this is the aesthetic we would like to see. I wonder if that's going to become a thing. I mean, you can kind of do that with cars too. Like there's customization that happens on those. It's like, no, I want these wheels on it. I want this, I want that. And like, people like that. People do like the customization.
I think you could stay in automotive and just follow that thought. Yeah. So there's 30 million 2019 Toyota Corollas. I think that's right. I pulled that one out, but that's the most popular mass-produced vehicle in the world, I think. The 2019 Toyota Corolla, there's more of those than any other car. And there's, 50 million 2019 Toyota Corollas were sold as of 2021. Jeez. There's no functional equivalent in buildings. I mean, that just boggles the mind. Yeah. Now, that's automotive, but also in automotive, you have McLarens. Yeah. McLarens are built in batch production mode. They're not mass produced. Toyota Corollas come in all kinds of flavors and styles too, right? Interiors, exteriors, colors, options. But Toyota Corolla is a Toyota Corolla. Everybody knows what that is. Yeah. If you go look at things like Ferrari, McLaren, all these kind of supercars, well, they don't make that many of them. and they have a different production process. It's more about small batch. Now, it's not to say that small batch manufacturing doesn't make you money. You can be profitable doing small batch size manufacturing. You can be profitable doing made to stock, which is what the Toyotas are, because they know what the demand's going to be globally and they build to that. Versus you have to go and order your Bugatti, right? And then they'll make it for you.
And wait 18 months and then you finally get it. Right.
They fly you out so you can see it getting made and all of that. But Bugatti's making money on those cars. It's not like they don't know how to make money on it. So that's kind of my point is the batch size kind of tells you something about the business model and you can work to that batch size successfully. You don't have to have it all come down an assembly line. It still works. And some of the work that's going on in the Nordic countries is looking at the differences in small batch size manufacturing and how that's differentiated from, say, a mass produced. But it's all industrialized. It all uses the same lean thinking. It all applies the same principles. It's just a matter of degree, in my opinion. I don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater just because of the batch size, but you got to pay attention to it. That's for sure.
Do Corinthian leathers, do they come from cows from Corinth?
I was going to ask that.
It's an old commercial back in the day.
I don't know.
You don't know that
reference. I'm sorry.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Oh, man, I'm an older soul than both of y'all. Look at that.
I don't know about that.
Look at that.
I was thinking about,
Well,
I'm the one that outed with the dad joke. I mean, like, hard too. My kids groaned at school from here.
What was it? It was like Cadillacs or something back in the day. What was his name? The only reason I know him, I'll out myself here. The only reason I know this guy is because he was in Spy Kids, and that was a big one back in the day, right?
Yeah, my kids watch that.
Yeah,
see, there it is.
And I remember Dad coming in and seeing him. He was the grandpa, and he's like, "That's the Corinthian leather guy." And I was like, "What do you mean Corinthian leather?" And it was like a Cadillac commercial or something. It was like, dude would walk out and be like, genuine Corinthian leather. Like, just, I don't know.
I love that. Do you remember when they would balance the champagne glasses on the car and they'd pour the champagne and the car would be running and none of the glasses would move? Yeah. They had all that kind of high-end stuff for a while.
It's the chicken head one. Have you seen that? I think it was Mercedes that did that one recently. It was basically like, they have a chicken and they're like holding it. And you know how a chicken is like almost like a gimbal, their head just like
their head bobs.
Their head stays put. So it's like they're like moving the body, and then the chicken's
that is so weird.
Head is just staying put. And they're like, what it's like to ride in a Mercedes. And I was like, all right, yeah, I can give it that. That's pretty cool.
That's a new one. Yeah, that's for sure.
I keep getting it on my Instagram feed.
And you gotta they won't let you drive it. Like they won't let anybody drive it. You got to go out there and get trained.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah,
it makes sense. The suckers are so freaking fast. I just
drive it into a wall, probably.
Yeah, me too.
Great way to go.
I wouldn't know how to. Yeah.
Crazy.
The first day he got his car, and that was it.
Woo! Yeah, done.
Way to go out.
Crazy eyes. So happy. Crazy eyes from Mr. Deeds. You remember that one?
These things are fast.
The end of things are fast.
Great day.
I love it.
That is something I always used to think about too in industrial processes.
That was a great tie-in. I got to give you a hand for that one. Well done. Well done.
Being totally out of control. I think I remember that, But if you're not careful, man, I always say it was like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, like in Mickey Mouse when he would start running the broomsticks and he didn't know how to turn it off. You got to it's powerful. You got to be careful with it.
It will run off.
Yeah.
It will. Yeah. I see that in building systems all the time. All the time. Get it spinning. And you're like, oh, wait. Yeah. Right. Like, come back.
Well, because every mistake you make is now multiplied. Every good thing you do is multiplied, but every mistake you make is also multiplied. And now you got to go fix it. Now you got to go rework it all. Yeah. And that's the scary thing.
I felt this on stage the other day whenever I was playing guitar at church. I had a delay pedal on where it would repeat the note over and over again, right? So it ba 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 ba. I hit a wrong note, and then just the wrong note got delayed over and over and over again. You're come back.
It's a good example.
Yeah, there you go. All right, yeah, sorry.
The automotive recall. That's another
Automotive
Yeah.
what, huh?
When you get a recall and bring them back, the airbag's broke. Everybody needs to you get a safety recall on the seatbelt or something's not working. Now everybody's got to go back to the dealership with the new car and get the rework. We found this on the Wawa stores we did. You get one thing baked in, and all of a sudden you're 20 of them down the road. And it's like, oh, geez, okay, I've done that 20 times.
Yeah.
Nobody told you though. That was the other thing. Is like they just deal with it in the field. They would make it happen, and then they wouldn't tell you. And then they just deal with it again and again and again and again.
That is such an important point.
Instead
I don't
of the
know
feedback.
how many times we have seen repetitious projects.
No, well, that's a big problem. Actually, I've dealt with is that we and I think it's beautiful. Construction people are heroes, really.
Yeah.
I liken them to firefighters and cowboys, right? That's your ideal superintendent. He's a firefighter. He's a cowboy. He can get it done. He can improvise. He uses all his skills and creativity to solve unforeseen conditions all the time and keep everything rolling, right? And that's the kind of guy you want on your job site. The problem you get into in Industrialized is as we start serializing things, you've got to have controls. And that's stuff that guys in the construction industry aren't used to, the level of reporting and controls, because I've got to know, say I'm back at HQ and we're tracking the job with you, we've got to know where those defects are because we may be building 50 more of them out here in the back. And if you don't report that back, we can't be fixing it 50 times. And so quality assurance, quality control guys, the documentation that's required. Obviously, we want to use digital to make that as slick and efficient as we can do. But without that data, you're running blind. And so we've got to start training and socializing that principle with our best-in-class construction guys, to start developing the data. As they're executing the project, they've got to report the data back in a way that we can read so that we can address that in our IC plan, in our batch production process, and make sure it gets dealt with. The other thing is, don't just fix it. There's something wrong that, the designers need to address. And so often, as you guys know, we have that kind of dichotomy between, the design guys, they do what they do, but we all, they ain't going to do it right. You heard that a million times, right? They ain't going to do it right. Well, but we don't say anything. We fix it. You can't do that anymore. That really doesn't work for you. That's not an advantage. So I like to think about the construction industry of the future a little bit how I like to think about like Navy SEALs, and I'm not an expert on this. Actually, I was reading about this, getting ready for this interview. But if you think about a small, highly functional, cross-trained team, remember, in the future, we're going to have fewer guys doing more high-level work, right? And imagine MEP and structural and carpentry as one unit. We're building them as multi-trade assemblies in a facility with guys like that on the line. We put them out in the field. These guys are mobile. They're well geared, and they know how to install this stuff efficiently. If there's a problem with the plumbing connection, there's a guy there that's specialized that knows how to deal with it. If there's a problem with the electrical or low voltage, there's a guy on that crew that knows how to deal with it. But they also know how to install. They also know how to stage. They also know how quickly they need to go in and out. And so I think that gets me really excited for my son, the kind of business he could have working with others that are multi-trade, higher margin, lower volume work, higher skill, because all the low skill stuff we're doing in the plant, we may be automating that stuff in the future. So where do these guys go? They go higher up in the value stream, and they're being compensated for it, but they're also a lot more efficient than we've ever seen. And I think that's the future, and I think that's an exciting future for us. I'm really excited when I go to some of the electrical guys, and they have these amazing steel shop Now they're doing steel work, and their steel work's top notch, but they're an electrical subcontractor. It's like, oh yeah, you guys are building containers. Well, yeah, we couldn't get any containers a few years back, so we started building them. And now we got a really good steel crew in here, and they can do as good as anybody. To me, that's where we're going to go. We're going to start having companies that know how to do multi-trade really well. They may be partnering with another company, or they may bring that stuff in-house. And those guys are going to be the leaders, in my opinion. Are you guys seeing that?
I haven't seen it, really.
I see mechanical, heavy industrial, mechanical. I do see shops that have integrated specifically steel for like, building a large chill water pipe rack or something like this.
Yeah.
We've seen a good bit of that. That's around the data center.
Yes, the data center guys are pushing that, and I think they're the ones that are kind of leading because it makes so much sense in data center.
They're getting strained. I mean, there's these guys, like we said, there's just a lot of it going on. There's only so many companies that know how to do that kind of mechanical work. Makes sense to try to bring some efficiency to it. So, I'm dealing with that. It's got the specifics of mechanical. That's the king. That's what needs to work.
Right.
So I'm going to build everything up under it.
Right.
I've seen a little of that. And we've seen a subcontract. We've seen that done very successfully too. We're involved in a lot of that work.
Yeah. I'm seeing, I think as we get back into hopefully the residential market starts to move again, once these rates once people start feeling the rate environment is healthier, as we start looking at higher rise residential, I think you're going to start seeing assemblies there. I've been looking at kitchens that are coming in with the walls, as like almost kitchen pods, and they look great. Once they get installed, you'd never know they came in as a single piece, but all of the connections around the water, some of the electrical work's already done. It's either goes to a whip, or they may be a J-box where they connect to. Things that you can do where you have a single point of connection, whereas previously you had multiple points of connection that you'd have to do in the field. You can get that down to a single point. You're going to see efficiencies there. And those will inevitably involve multi-trade, because the more you can put into that and the easier that access point for the connection is, the more you can engineer and design that, the faster you're going to execute on site. And that's where some of that's happening outside of data, say, in the regular space. And we're just going to see a lot more of that. And shops and installers that are willing to take that on, it is going to be less field scope. And that's a challenge for some of the estimators to kind of get their head around. It's like, hey, I've been building my cost models for the last 30 years around that kind of scope. I don't even know how to do this yet. But that'll change. I think once we get them onboarded, I believe some of the same companies will see opportunities in multi-trade assemblies, and they'll just switch over.
Yeah.
I think the megaphone this time is going to be, I'm sorry, but I'm thinking about my son.
Yeah.
And the construction industry moving forward. What's going to be exciting to get these young people engaged with what we're doing in construction? How do we make that an inspiring career path that's, let's put some computers in there. Let's put some robots in there. Whatever it is that gets people jazzed about, this is probably, I think it's the greatest job in the world, frankly. I think it's got the best people in the world working in it. I don't like it when people are down on construction. I know we got a lot of problems, but it's inspiring to be in construction. It really is. And how do we get creative about attracting more young people into that, men, women, everybody together in that? I think that would be my megaphone. Let's come up with some really cool stuff for these young guys to get jazzed about,
You pulled it off, man.
There we go.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah, boom. Yeah.
Right there.
Third time's a charm, man. Appreciate you coming back.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Love being here.
Yeah.